She walked in for a simple checkup, but when the CEO doctor locked eyes with the twins, he realized he was staring at the family he never knew he had. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. Melissa Carter nervously adjusted the strap of her worn handbag as she waited for the elevator that would take her to the 35th floor of the imposing Fifth Avenue building. The security guards eyed her with barely disguised curiosity, their gazes lingering on her scuffed shoes that stood in stark contrast to the immaculate marble lobby. She didn't belong here. Every polished surface seemed to whisper this truth. At 26, working as a waitress at 3 different restaurants in New Jersey, Melissa had gathered every ounce of courage for this moment. Her reflection in the mirrored elevator doors showed a woman trying desperately to appear confident, shoulders back, chin up. But the dark circles under her eyes betrayed nights of restless worry. The elevator announced its arrival with a soft chime. Melissa stepped inside, immediately retreating to the corner as 2 executives in tailored suits entered, their conversation about market fluctuations momentarily pausing as they assessed her. She pressed the button for the 35th floor and watched the numbers climb, each digit bringing her closer to a conversation that would alter the course of her life. Dr. Jonathan Reynolds' office exuded the opulence that characterized his existence. The son of one of Boston's most traditional families, graduated with honors from Harvard and about to begin his cardiothoracic surgery residency at the prestigious Massachusetts General Hospital, Jonathan personified American privilege and success. Their 3-year relationship had been meticulously kept away from his family's eyes and social circle. A fling he managed with the same clinical precision he applied to his surgeries. "Dr. Reynolds will see you now," his secretary announced, not bothering to mask her disdain. Her eyes traveled from Melissa's drugstore makeup to her department store dress, making it clear she considered her an anomaly in these surroundings. Jonathan barely looked up from the medical journals spread across his mahogany desk when she entered. His office overlooked Manhattan, the sprawling city seemingly at his feet, much like everything else in his life. "Melissa," he acknowledged, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone accustomed to controlling every situation. "This is unexpected. I thought we agreed to communicate via phone given my schedule." She remained standing, her fingers clutching her handbag so tightly her knuckles whitened. "I needed to tell you this in person." Something in her voice finally made him look up, his perfectly composed features showing a flicker of annoyance at the interruption. "I'm pregnant, Jonathan. They're twins." The silence that followed was sharper than any scream. Jonathan slowly removed his designer glasses, placing them precisely beside the journal he'd been reading. There was no genuine surprise in his expression, only a cold calculation that Melissa had never noticed before. "And you expect exactly what with this information?" His voice was controlled, almost clinical. "I thought you should know. We could—" The words faltered on her lips as she watched his reaction. Jonathan interrupted her with a dry laugh. "You really think I'm going to ruin my career for a New Jersey waitress and 2 bastards who probably aren't even mine?" The words hit Melissa like physical blows. She watched, stunned, as he opened his drawer, removed a checkbook, and meticulously filled out an amount. "This should cover any necessary procedure, or if you prefer to proceed, consider it my only contribution." He slid the check across the polished desk. "Let's be realistic, Melissa. You can barely afford the rent for that cubicle in the Bronx. How do you intend to raise children? Besides, you would never be worthy of the circles I move in. My family has a name to uphold in Boston." Melissa's vision blurred with tears. "I thought you loved me." "Love?" He checked his platinum watch. "It was fun while it lasted. You were convenient. But now I'm heading to Boston, to a career I've built my entire life. What could we possibly offer each other?" He glanced pointedly at his watch again. "I have a conference in 20 minutes. My secretary can call you a taxi." Melissa stumbled out of the office, the crumpled check clutched in her hand, while the secretary avoided her gaze. In the elevator, alone at last, she let the tears flow freely. In the lobby, the older security guard watched with pity as she walked through the revolving doors into the cold reality of Manhattan. That night, in her tiny Bronx apartment, Melissa stared at the peeling ceiling. The check, now torn into small pieces, lay in the trash can. With only $247 in her bank account, overdue rent, and 2 embryos growing in her womb, the future looked like an endless abyss. She placed her hand on her still flat stomach. "What are we going to do?" she whispered to the darkness, the question hanging unanswered in the musty air. The following weeks unfolded in a succession of humiliations. The morning sickness hit hard, making her late for her early shifts. Her manager at the downtown diner pulled her aside after she rushed to the bathroom for the 3rd time in one morning. "Look, Melissa," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Customers don't feel comfortable with pregnant waitresses. It's not professional." He handed her a final paycheck that wouldn't even cover next week's rent. By her 4th month, her pregnancy became visible enough that her second restaurant job also let her go, using different words but conveying the same message. Only the late-night shift at a 24-hour diner in New Jersey remained, where the manager was desperate enough for staff that he overlooked her growing belly. Her landlord was less forgiving. "Rules are rules," he shrugged, handing her the eviction notice. "Rent's been late 3 months running. I got people waiting for apartments." Melissa packed her meager belongings into 2 suitcases, donating what wouldn't fit to a neighbor. The night before she had to leave, she sat cross-legged on the bare mattress, counting the money she had left. $112. Not enough for a new security deposit, not enough for anything. The women's shelter was clean but crowded, the night filled with the sounds of other women's sorrows. Melissa lay awake on the narrow cot, Jonathan's voice echoing in her mind. "You would never be worthy." The words haunted her, joining a chorus of doubts that grew louder each day. She found work cleaning office buildings in Manhattan, night shifts that accommodated her increasingly awkward movements as the twins grew. The irony wasn't lost on her as she emptied trash cans in offices similar to Jonathan's, the ghost of her former self sometimes reflected in the windows she wiped clean. 7 months pregnant, exhausted after doubling her cleaning shift to cover for a sick colleague, Melissa slumped into a chair in one of the executive offices she had just finished cleaning. Her swollen ankles throbbed, and the twins seemed particularly active tonight, kicking as if protesting her long hours on her feet. A forgotten financial magazine lay on the desk. Melissa picked it up, absent-mindedly flipping through pages of stock reports and market analyses. She stopped at an article featuring a determined-looking black woman on the cover. From Janitor to CEO, Sarah Johnson's unlikely journey to the Fortune 500. Something awakened within Melissa as she devoured the article. Sarah Johnson had started cleaning offices at night just like her while raising 2 children alone. She'd noticed inefficiencies in the company's logistics system, taught herself programming, and developed software that revolutionized supply chain management. Melissa caressed her prominent belly, a new resolution forming within her. "You don't need him," she whispered to the babies. "We're going to prove he was wrong. About everything." That night, Melissa did something she'd never imagined doing. She called her former high school science teacher, the only one who had always believed in her potential. Dr. Eleanor Wright, now the director of a biotechnology research laboratory, listened attentively to her former student's situation. "Come see me tomorrow," was all Eleanor said. The next day, Melissa walked into the modest laboratory in a converted warehouse space in Brooklyn. Eleanor, now in her 50s with streaks of gray in her dark hair, embraced her without hesitation. "You were always my most promising student," Eleanor said, examining Melissa's pregnant form with kind eyes. "Brilliant minds shouldn't be wasted on cleaning offices." A week later, Melissa started as an administrative assistant at the laboratory, with flexible hours and the promise that she could bring the twins when they were born. During her free moments, she studied biotechnology ferociously, absorbing knowledge with the same intensity with which she had sworn never to be called unworthy again. The night shift supervisor was shocked when she handed in her resignation. "You're giving up a steady job? In your condition?" Melissa smiled for what felt like the first time in months. "I'm not giving up. I'm moving forward." As her due date approached, Eleanor helped her secure a tiny studio apartment near the lab. The scientific team, mostly young researchers working on shoestring grants, pitched in to furnish it with second-hand baby essentials. A portable crib, a changing table that doubled as a dresser, and a rocking chair transformed the bare space into something resembling a home. When Ethan and Emma were born on a frigid January morning, Melissa held the tiny bundles in her arms and made a solemn promise. "You will never know the name of the man who rejected us, but the whole world will know ours." The twins slept peacefully in their shared crib, unaware that their mother's tears weren't of sadness, but of fierce determination. In that sterile hospital room, as Manhattan's lights twinkled through the window, Melissa Carter silently vowed that the words spoken in that luxury office would someday return to haunt the man who had uttered them. While looking at the peeling ceiling of her apartment, Melissa couldn't possibly imagine that 15 years later, she would be the one striding through marble corridors of her own skyscraper, while Jonathan Reynolds would helplessly watch the rise of the woman he once deemed unworthy. The winter wind howled outside the emergency shelter's windows as Melissa pulled the thin blanket tighter around her swollen belly. 6 months pregnant now, her body ached from the plastic mattress that did little to cushion against the metal frame beneath. Around her, women's voices ebbed and flowed, some crying softly into pillows, others arguing over missing toiletries, a few sharing whispered stories of the circumstances that had brought them here. "First night's always the hardest," said an older woman with silver-streaked hair, settling onto the cot beside Melissa's. "I'm Diane. Been here 3 weeks." Melissa nodded, unable to process how this had become her reality. Just 2 months ago, she'd had an apartment, small and in disrepair, but hers. Now she was homeless, pregnant with twins, and clutching a plastic bag containing her remaining possessions. "When are you due?" Diane asked, eyeing Melissa's stomach. "March," Melissa whispered, her hand protectively covering the spot where one of the twins was kicking. "It's twins." Diane's eyes widened slightly. "You got family helping?" The question sent a fresh wave of pain through Melissa's chest. She shook her head, turning toward the wall to end the conversation. Tears leaked silently onto her pillow as Jonathan's voice echoed in her mind. "You can barely afford the rent for that cubicle in the Bronx. How do you intend to raise children?" Morning brought the humiliation of standing in line for breakfast, plastic tray in hand like a prisoner. The volunteer serving oatmeal offered a sympathetic smile that only deepened Melissa's shame. She'd always been self-sufficient, working since she was 16. Now charity fed her and her unborn children. "Protein's good for the babies," the volunteer said kindly, adding an extra scoop of peanut butter to Melissa's oatmeal. The small kindness nearly broke her. After breakfast, Melissa faced the day's daunting challenge, finding work. 6 applications and 4 rejections later, each potential employer's eyes lingering on her pregnant belly before delivering polite excuses, she arrived at the Metropolitan Office Tower, responding to an ad for night cleaning staff. The building supervisor, a gruff man named Martinez, looked her up and down. "Night shift's hard work. 50 floors, tight schedule." "I'm stronger than I look," Melissa replied, meeting his gaze directly. Martinez's eyes softened slightly. "My sister worked through both her pregnancies. Start tonight, 10 p.m. Bring comfortable shoes." That night, Melissa joined a team of mostly immigrant women pushing cleaning carts through silent corridors where daytime executives conducted million-dollar deals. The irony wasn't lost on her as she emptied trash cans in offices larger than her former apartment. She scrubbed toilets in executive bathrooms with marble countertops, catching glimpses of her exhausted reflection in gold-framed mirrors. "Keep moving," urged the team leader. 20 more offices on this floor." By 4 a.m., Melissa's back throbbed and her swollen ankles felt like they might split her skin. In a 40th floor corner office, she paused, leaning against a mahogany desk to catch her breath. The skyline glittered beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, the same Manhattan that had seemed so full of promise when she'd first arrived from Pennsylvania 5 years ago. The twins stirred within her, a reminder of why she couldn't give up. $50 per night, 6 nights a week. If she was careful with every penny, maybe she could afford a room somewhere before they were born. Weeks passed in a monotonous rhythm of shelter nights and cleaning shifts. Melissa grew more proficient, developing a system that allowed occasional rest breaks for her increasingly cumbersome body. During these precious moments, she'd scan documents left on desks, absorbing fragments of business language, market analyses, and corporate strategies. 7 months pregnant, her uniform stretched tight across her belly, Melissa worked an extra shift covering for a sick colleague. The executive floor of Watson Biomedical needed special attention before a morning board meeting. She dusted conference tables, polished glass doors, and vacuumed plush carpeting until every surface gleamed. Exhausted, she sank into an executive chair in the last office, her swollen feet throbbing inside worn sneakers. The twins were particularly active tonight, their movements a constant reminder of the approaching reality she wasn't prepared for. A forgotten financial magazine caught her eye on the desk. Melissa picked it up, absent-mindedly flipping through glossy pages showcasing luxury watches and exotic vacation destinations. She stopped at an article featuring a determined-looking black woman on the cover beneath the headline, "From Janitor to CEO, Sarah Johnson's Unlikely Journey to the Fortune 500. The story gripped her immediately. Sarah Johnson had started as a night cleaner at a pharmaceutical company while raising 2 children alone after her husband's death. Working nights, studying during days, she'd noticed inefficiencies in the company's manufacturing process and developed a solution that saved millions. Now she headed her own pharmaceutical consulting firm, valued at over $300 million. "I didn't have advantages," Sarah was quoted saying, "but I had determination and the ability to see opportunities where others saw only obstacles." Something awakened within Melissa as she read those words. Her hand moved to her belly, feeling the twins' movements beneath her palm. "You don't need him," she whispered fiercely. "We're going to prove he was wrong. About everything." The magazine went into her bag, her first theft ever, but she needed those words like oxygen. That night in the shelter, while other women slept, Melissa read the article 3 more times by bathroom light. Sarah Johnson had transformed her circumstances through education and observation. She'd leveraged her unique position, seeing a company from the invisible cleaner's perspective, into invaluable insight. Morning brought a bold decision. Melissa reached for her phone and scrolled to a contact she hadn't used in years. Dr. Eleanor Wright, her high school science teacher who'd once told her she had the mind of a researcher. Her finger hovered over the call button. What would she even say after all this time? That she'd failed at life? That the promising student was now pregnant, homeless, and cleaning toilets? The twins kicked simultaneously as if urging her forward. "Dr. Wright's office," answered a professional voice. I'd like to speak with Eleanor Wright, please. This is Melissa Carter. I was her student at Westfield High." A pause. 1 moment. Seconds stretched eternally before a familiar, warm voice came on the line. "Melissa, is that really you?" The kindness in those 4 words broke the dam. Melissa's voice cracked as she summarized her situation, each word painfully revealing how far she'd fallen from the bright future Eleanor had once predicted for her. When she finished, expecting pity or polite distance, Eleanor's response stunned her. "Come see me tomorrow," was all she said. The following afternoon, Melissa stood before a converted warehouse in Brooklyn's industrial district. "Wright Biotechnology Research," read a modest sign beside the entrance. Inside, the reception area was sparsely furnished but immaculately clean. Eleanor appeared moments later, her dark hair now streaked with gray, but her eyes as sharp and kind as Melissa remembered. Without hesitation, she embraced her former student, seeming unbothered by Melissa's obvious pregnancy or worn clothing. "You were always my most promising student," Eleanor said, leading her through a laboratory where young researchers worked amid sophisticated equipment. "When you didn't go to college, I always wondered what happened." Melissa explained about her mother's illness, the medical bills that had drained their modest savings, and the series of jobs that had become her life instead of the college education she'd once dreamed of. Eleanor listened without interruption, then showed Melissa to her office overlooking the main lab. "I need an administrative assistant," she said directly. "Someone organized, intelligent, and discreet. The hours are flexible and—" She glanced at Melissa's belly. "Babies are welcome once they arrive. We have a small room that could be converted into a nursery space." Melissa stared in disbelief. "You'd hire me? Like this?" Eleanor's smile was warm, but her eyes were serious. "I'm hiring the brain I remember, the one that could understand complex biological systems intuitively. The pregnancy is irrelevant to your capabilities." A week later, Melissa started work at Wright Biotechnology. Her first tasks were basic: filing reports, organizing schedules, managing supply orders, but she approached each with meticulous attention. During lunch breaks, she studied the research papers scattered throughout the lab, looking up unfamiliar terms, gradually building her understanding of the biotechnology work being conducted. Eleanor noticed. 3 weeks into the job, she placed a stack of textbooks on Melissa's desk. "These are the basics. Start with cellular biology. Ask questions when you have them." In the evenings, back at the shelter, Melissa read by the dim bathroom light until her eyes burned. The terminology was foreign, the concepts complex, but something in her mind clicked with each new chapter. This was a language she somehow understood intuitively. The shelter director noticed her studying and offered use of a small storage room after hours. "Quieter than the bathroom," she said with a knowing smile. "Just lock up when you're done." With Eleanor's steady guidance and her own fierce determination, Melissa absorbed knowledge with the intensity of someone who'd glimpsed a lifeline. Her pregnancy advanced, her body grew more unwieldy, but her mind expanded with each page turned, each concept mastered. Eleanor helped her secure a tiny studio apartment near the lab when her 8th month made the shelter's curfew rules impossible to maintain with her work schedule. The scientific team, mostly young researchers working on tight budgets, surprised her with second-hand baby essentials: a portable crib, a changing table, baby clothes organized by size. "We're a small lab, but we take care of our own," said Raj, a postdoctoral researcher, as they assembled the crib in her new apartment. When Ethan and Emma were born on a frigid January morning, Melissa held the tiny bundles in her arms and made a solemn promise. "You will never know the name of the man who rejected us, but the whole world will know ours." 2 weeks later, she brought the twins to the converted nursery at the lab. Eleanor had installed a used bassinet beside Melissa's desk and a changing table in the corner. Between administrative tasks, Melissa cared for the infants while continuing her studies, often reading aloud from textbooks as if the scientific terminology were lullabies. "They'll be speaking in equations before they talk," joked Lisa, a young researcher who often helped with the babies when Melissa needed both hands for work. At night in her tiny apartment, watching her children sleep, Melissa would sometimes remember the opulent office where Jonathan had dismissed her future so casually. The pain remained, but it was transforming into something else, a fuel that powered her through exhaustion, feeding a determination that grew stronger each day. In the moment when the twins were born on that frigid January morning, Melissa couldn't know that in some years the device she would develop in her spare hours would be considered the greatest advancement in cardiac monitoring of the century, completely overshadowing any contributions the man who abandoned her would ever make to the field. The promise Melissa made to her newborn twins echoed in her mind daily as she navigated the exhausting yet transformative first 2 years of motherhood. Her tiny studio apartment became a carefully orchestrated space where every inch served multiple purposes. The kitchen table doubled as her desk, the living area transformed into a play space during the day and her bedroom at night, while the twins shared a crib in what was meant to be a walk-in closet. "Emma, sweetie, gentle with your brother," Melissa murmured, watching her daughter's determined fingers grip a colorful plastic ring that Ethan also wanted. At 8 months old, the twins already displayed distinct personalities. Emma, assertive and analytical, Ethan, observant and patient. Mornings began before dawn, with Melissa nursing one baby while reading scientific journals propped against her knees. By 6:30, she had both twins fed, changed, and packed into their second-hand double stroller for the 12-minute walk to Eleanor's lab. The other researchers had grown accustomed to the baby's presence, some even scheduling their break times to coincide with when they might hold one of the twins while Melissa organized laboratory orders or transcribed research notes. "You're reading about cardiac monitoring systems to them?" Dr. Raj Patel asked one afternoon, finding Melissa nursing Emma while reading aloud from a medical journal to both babies. Melissa smiled tiredly. "They seem to like the rhythm of scientific language. Works better than lullabies." "Start them young," Raj nodded approvingly, "though I suspect they'll be correcting our equations before kindergarten at this rate." These moments of normalcy and acceptance were precious to Melissa. The lab had become more than a workplace. It was a sanctuary where her status as a single mother was irrelevant compared to her growing contributions to their research. Eleanor had begun assigning Melissa increasingly complex administrative tasks, noting her quick grasp of scientific concepts that many graduate students struggled to comprehend. What had started as filing and scheduling had evolved into helping researchers organize their data and occasionally suggesting methodological improvements. "You have an intuitive understanding of systems that can't be taught," Eleanor observed one evening as they worked late, the twins asleep in their portable playpen. "Have you considered taking some formal courses? The community college has night classes." Melissa glanced at her sleeping babies. "Maybe when they're a little older. Right now, between work and them, I barely remember to eat." The physical toll of her new life was evident in the dark circles beneath her eyes and the clothes that hung loosely on her frame. Yet there was also a new sharpness in her gaze, a focused intensity that hadn't existed before the twins. Nights were the hardest. After putting the babies down, Melissa would often collapse onto her pull-out sofa bed, only to be awakened an hour later by Ethan's hungry cries or Emma's discomfort from teething. During these endless midnight hours, rocking one baby while the other fussed in the crib, Jonathan's face would sometimes appear in her mind, his clinical dismissal, his certainty that she would fail. "We're proving him wrong every day," she whispered to Emma during one such night, the baby's fevered forehead pressed against her neck. "Every single day." When the twins turned 1, the lab team surprised Melissa with a small celebration. They'd pooled resources to buy educational toys and contributed to a savings account for the twins' future education. "Speech development at 13 months exceeds expectations," noted Lisa, a developmental biologist, watching Emma stack blocks while naming their colors. "And Ethan's fine motor control is equally advanced," added Raj, observing the boy methodically fitting shapes into their corresponding holes. Melissa felt a surge of pride mixed with vindication. Her children were thriving despite the circumstances of their birth, despite the absence of the privileged pedigree their father had deemed essential. Around this time, Eleanor approached Melissa with an unexpected proposal. "The Peterson Foundation is offering scholarships for working parents pursuing science degrees. The application deadline is next week. I've taken the liberty of starting the paperwork for you." Melissa stared at the forms. "Eleanor, I can't possibly—" "You can and you will," Eleanor interrupted firmly. "You're already doing the work of someone with advanced training. This just makes it official." 2 months later, Melissa began night classes in biochemistry at the local community college. Twice weekly, Eleanor would stay with the twins at the apartment while Melissa rushed to 3-hour evening lectures, arriving with barely enough time to slide into her seat before the professor began. Despite her exhaustion, Melissa found herself thriving academically. Concepts that her classmates struggled to grasp seemed intuitive to her. Her practical experience in Eleanor's lab gave her an advantage in understanding real-world applications of theoretical principles. "Ms. Carter, this analysis is graduate-level work," her professor commented, returning a paper with a perfect score. "Have you considered transferring to a 4-year program after your associate's degree?" The suggestion seemed laughable given her circumstances, yet Melissa filed it away, another potential step on a path she was creating day by day. As her knowledge expanded, Melissa began spending her rare free moments sketching ideas for improving cardiac monitoring systems. The seed had been planted while organizing research on heart disease mortality rates, noting the critical gap between symptom onset and treatment. Current monitoring systems were either too invasive for preventative use or too imprecise for early detection. What if we could create something non-invasive but precise enough for daily use? She mused aloud one evening, sketching concepts while the twins played on a blanket nearby. Eleanor peered over her shoulder at the rough diagrams. "That's an ambitious goal. The current technology has limitations because of the distance between external sensors and cardiac tissue. But what if we approach it differently?" Melissa continued, excitement building. "Instead of trying to hear the heart more clearly through layers of tissue, what if we learn to better interpret the signals we can already detect?" These conversations became regular occurrences, often taking place during lunch breaks or after hours when the twins were occupied with the junior researchers who had become their extended family. Melissa's initial sketches evolved into more sophisticated diagrams, incorporating principles from her biochemistry studies and insights from the lab's ongoing research. The twins' second birthday arrived with another milestone, Melissa's completion of her associate's degree with highest honors. The celebration was small but meaningful, with Eleanor presenting her with a transfer application to Columbia University's biochemistry program. "They have evening classes and a scholarship specifically for single parents in STEM fields," Eleanor explained. "Your grades make you a strong candidate." The thought of adding university-level courses to her already overwhelming schedule seemed impossible, yet something in Melissa refused to dismiss the opportunity. Each step forward was a refutation of Jonathan's certainty that she would fail. It was around this time that Melissa first encountered Jonathan's name again. A medical journal left open in the lab featured an article on innovative cardiac surgical techniques, with a photograph of Dr. Jonathan Reynolds demonstrating his approach at a medical conference. He looked exactly as she remembered, confident, polished, privileged, now lauded as a rising star in cardiothoracic surgery. The sight of his face caused a physical reaction, a tightening in her chest, a momentary inability to breathe. But as she read the article describing his revolutionary approach to certain heart procedures, something unexpected happened. Instead of pain, she felt a curious detachment, followed by a critical assessment of his methodology. "His technique still requires full sternotomy," she noted aloud. "There's nothing actually minimally invasive about it." Eleanor glanced at the article, then at Melissa's face. "You know him?" Melissa closed the journal. "Another lifetime." That night, after putting the twins to bed, Melissa sat at her kitchen table with a fresh notepad. On it, she began sketching a new iteration of her cardiac monitoring concept, incorporating insights from the latest research papers and her growing understanding of biochemical markers. "If we can identify the precursors to cardiac events," she murmured to herself, "we could revolutionize preventative cardiology." The irony wasn't lost on her, that her work might someday intersect with Jonathan's field, perhaps even challenge the approaches he championed. The thought didn't consume her, but it lingered at the edges of her consciousness, adding an extra dimension to her determination. As her third year at Eleanor's lab began, Melissa's role had evolved significantly. No longer just an administrative assistant, she was now involved in research design and data analysis, with Eleanor increasingly treating her as a colleague rather than an employee. The twins, now steady on their feet and expanding their vocabularies daily, had become fixtures in the lab, absorbed into the scientific community like mascots. "Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell," Emma announced one morning, repeating a phrase she'd heard researchers discussing. "That's right, sweetheart." Melissa smiled, watching her daughter carefully place colored blocks in patterns that resembled the cell diagrams posted on the lab walls. Nearby, Ethan was being taught basic French terms by a visiting researcher, his pronunciation already remarkably accurate for a 2-year-old. The twins were absorbing knowledge at an extraordinary rate, their minds like sponges in the intellectually rich environment. Melissa was accepted to Columbia's evening program with a scholarship that covered 80% of her tuition. Her new schedule became even more demanding: lab work during days, university classes 3 evenings a week, studying whenever the twins slept, and continuous refinement of her cardiac monitoring concept in whatever moments remained. The physical toll was evident: weight loss, chronic fatigue, occasional moments when she would find herself staring blankly at a wall, momentarily unable to remember what she was doing. But these were offset by a growing sense of purpose and the tangible progress of her research ideas. "Your concept has merit," Eleanor told her after reviewing her latest designs. "With proper development, this could genuinely change how we approach cardiac monitoring." Those words, coming from a respected scientist with decades of experience, validated what Melissa had begun to suspect: that the idea forming in her mind was not just viable but potentially groundbreaking. While observing her children sleeping that night, their small chests rising and falling in peaceful rhythm, Melissa felt a surge of gratitude mixed with determination. The past 2 years had been a marathon of exhaustion and growth, of moments when continuing seemed impossible, followed by small triumphs that propelled her forward. In the moment when she sketched her first prototype sensor on a restaurant napkin during the twins' dinner, Melissa couldn't imagine that her idea scribbled on cheap paper would become the foundation of the empire that would one day place her face to face with the man who had dismissed her as insignificant. The napkin sketch that began as a late-night inspiration had evolved into something far more substantial 5 years later. Melissa stood at the front of the Columbia University auditorium, her biochemistry associate's degree diploma in hand, while Emma and Ethan, now 7 years old, applauded enthusiastically from the front row. Eleanor beamed beside them, proudly watching her protégé graduate with highest honors. "Mom! Mom! Over here!" Emma called out, waving frantically as Melissa descended from the stage. Her daughter's mathematical mind was already evident in the way she calculated the exact moment Melissa would appear in the aisle. "You were the best one up there," Ethan added in French, a language he'd picked up with remarkable ease from one of the lab's international researchers. At 7, he already spoke 3 languages fluently, absorbing them like oxygen. Melissa gathered them both in her arms, their small bodies warm against her graduation gown. "Thank you for being so patient with Mommy's studying," she whispered, fighting back tears of exhaustion and pride. "Dr. Peterson's waiting with your surprise," Eleanor said, checking her watch. "We should hurry." The surprise turned out to be a letter of acceptance to Columbia's MBA program, complete with a full scholarship for exceptional women in STEM. Professor Marcus Bennett, who had noticed Melissa's business acumen in an entrepreneurship elective, had personally championed her application. "This isn't just academic potential," he explained over coffee in his office the following week, the twins quietly doing advanced mathematics worksheets in the corner. "Your cardiac monitoring concept has commercial viability. With the right business framework, it could revolutionize preventative cardiology." Melissa glanced at her children, then back at the professor. "An MBA would mean 3 more nights away from them each week, which is why I've arranged for the program to accept your cardiac monitor development as your capstone project. You'll essentially receive credit for the work you're already doing." That evening, Melissa spread her latest monitoring prototype schematics across their kitchen table, no longer the wobbly second-hand piece from her studio days, but a sturdy oak table in their modest two-bedroom apartment in Washington Heights. The twins pulled up chairs on either side, their eyes moving intelligently over the diagrams. "Your power consumption calculation is off," Emma noted, pointing to a corner of the diagram. At 7, her mathematical intuition frequently surpassed that of doctoral students at the lab. "And this sensor configuration would be uncomfortable against the sternum," Ethan added, touching his own chest to demonstrate. Melissa smiled, still amazed by their precocious insights. "What would I do without my brilliant consultants?" Their apartment, though far from luxurious, represented significant progress from their early days. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with scientific journals and children's books in multiple languages. A dedicated study area housed 3 desks, one for Melissa and one for each twin. The refrigerator displayed perfect test scores and complex mathematical equations written in childish handwriting. The prototype monitoring device had begun showing promising results in preliminary tests. Unlike existing monitors that required invasive procedures or provided only limited data, Melissa's design incorporated biochemical markers and advanced algorithms to detect subtle changes preceding cardiac events. The initial accuracy rate of 92% had startled even Eleanor. "These results are extraordinary," Eleanor said, examining the data from their latest trial. "Particularly the prediction window, giving patients and doctors nearly 12 hours of warning before an incident." Melissa leaned against the lab bench, watching the data stream across the monitor. "It still needs refinement. The false positive rate is too high for clinical application." "But the direction is clear," Eleanor insisted, turning to face her fully. "Melissa, this isn't just good work. This is potentially revolutionary." A week later, Eleanor called Melissa into her office, closing the door, a rarity in their open lab culture. "I've consulted with the lab's legal team," Eleanor began, sliding a folder across her desk. "I want you to file a patent application for the cardiac monitor. In your name, not the lab's." Melissa stared at the documents. "But I developed it using lab resources during work hours." "You developed it using your extraordinary mind, on your own time, while raising twins and earning 2 degrees, Eleanor corrected firmly. "The lab will survive without claiming ownership of your intellectual property. Your future might not." That night, after tucking the twins into bed, Melissa sat alone at her kitchen table staring at the patent application. Filing in her own name meant taking responsibility for development costs, clinical trials, regulatory hurdles, a mountain of obstacles she couldn't possibly navigate alone. Professor Bennett's entrepreneurship lectures echoed in her mind. "Innovations don't commercialize themselves," he'd said. "They require strategic business planning and capital investment." The next day, she approached him after his evening MBA class. "I need advice on forming a medical technology startup," she said without preamble. Bennett's eyes lit up. "I was hoping you'd ask. Let's meet tomorrow. Bring your latest prototype data." The meeting turned into a regular weekly session, with Bennett helping Melissa develop a comprehensive business plan for what would become Carter Biotech. They worked in a quiet corner of the university cafe, the twins doing advanced reading nearby, occasionally contributing insights that made Bennett raise his eyebrows in surprise. "Your 7-year-olds understand market segmentation better than my second-year MBA students," he remarked after Ethan made an astute observation about potential hospital adoption rates. "They've grown up in laboratories and classrooms," Melissa explained. "Business concepts are just another system for them to analyze." By the twins' 8th birthday, Melissa had completed her patent application, refined her business plan, and identified potential investors specializing in medical technology startups. With Bennett's guidance, she secured a small business loan to lease a tiny laboratory space in a developing area of Brooklyn, the official headquarters of Carter Biotech. The space was barely 500 square feet, with second-hand equipment and a small office area. But seeing Carter Biotech on the door for the first time gave Melissa a surge of pride, unlike anything she'd experienced since the twins' birth. "This is where we're going to change cardiology," she told the twins as they helped unpack equipment on a Saturday morning. Emma looked around critically. "We need more computational power for the algorithms." "And better chairs," Ethan added practically. "You can't think properly in uncomfortable chairs." Melissa laughed, marveling at their blend of brilliance and childish pragmatism. Noted. Computational power and ergonomic seating are now top priorities. In the corner of the small lab, Melissa set up a study area for the twins for after-school hours, complete with advanced textbooks, comfortable seating, and a small refrigerator stocked with healthy snacks. The arrangement wasn't conventional, but neither was their family. While the twins thrived academically, testing into programs for profoundly gifted children, Melissa divided her time between MBA coursework, lab development, and seeking investors. Sleep became a luxury, often limited to 4 hours per night. Her health suffered: weight loss, occasional dizzy spells, a persistent cough she couldn't shake, but the momentum of her work propelled her forward. The first significant breakthrough came when her improved prototype achieved 98% accuracy in predicting cardiac irregularities 6 hours before conventional monitors detected any anomaly. Professor Bennett arranged a meeting with potential investors from Horizon Medical Ventures, a fund specializing in disruptive healthcare technologies. "Wear something professional but not flashy," he advised. "They'll already be skeptical of a single mother without a medical degree. Don't give them additional reasons to doubt you." The meeting took place at an upscale Manhattan restaurant. Melissa wore a carefully tailored navy suit purchased second-hand and altered to fit her slim frame. The twins sat in a corner booth working on advanced physics problems while occasionally glancing at their mother with encouraging smiles. "You brought your children to an investment pitch?" one investor asked, frowning. "My children are integral to Carter Biotech's story," Melissa replied calmly. "They've contributed to the algorithm development and represent the future generation of scientific thinkers." Initially skeptical, the investors became increasingly engaged as Melissa methodically presented her data, prototype designs, and market analysis. When one investor questioned a technical aspect of the monitoring system, Emma quietly approached the table. "The algorithm accounts for that variable through a recursive neural network," she explained, drawing a quick diagram on a napkin. "It's actually more efficient than conventional monitoring because it learns from individual baseline patterns." The investors exchanged impressed glances. By meeting's end, they had scheduled a follow-up visit to the Brooklyn lab to see the prototype in action. 3 weeks and 4 additional meetings later, Horizon Medical Ventures offered Melissa her first significant investment, $3 million for a 20% stake in Carter Biotech. The capital would allow her to expand the lab, hire specialized engineers, and begin formal clinical trials. While Melissa's career trajectory soared upward, news occasionally reached her of Jonathan's continuing success. A medical journal featured his innovative surgical approaches. A Boston newspaper reported his marriage to Catherine Wellington, daughter of a prominent hospital board chairman. Each mention created a momentary tightness in her chest, followed by renewed determination. One evening after the twins had gone to bed, Melissa found herself searching Jonathan's name online, something she rarely allowed herself to do. Images of his life in Boston appeared. Jonathan in surgical scrubs, Jonathan and his wife at charity galas, Jonathan receiving an award for surgical excellence, the Wellington Reynolds Mansion in Beacon Hill, described as a 19th-century architectural masterpiece. The contrast between his life of established privilege and her hard-fought climb couldn't be starker. Yet for the first time, Melissa didn't feel the ache of rejection. Instead, she felt a strange detachment, as if observing the life of a stranger who had once briefly intersected with hers. She closed the laptop and returned to her work, making notes on the latest clinical trial protocols. Tomorrow would bring more investors to the lab, more development challenges, more balancing of motherhood with entrepreneurship. The path remained difficult, but it was undeniably hers. The following week, a letter arrived for Jonathan at his Boston office, an invitation to deliver a keynote address at Harvard Medical School on innovations in cardiac surgery. As he read it with satisfaction, placing it prominently on his mahogany desk, he couldn't know that across the city, in a small Brooklyn lab, the woman he had abandoned pregnant was developing technology that would soon render many of his surgical innovations obsolete. While Jonathan celebrated his invitation to lecture at Harvard, he couldn't imagine that in a few years the device developed by the woman he had abandoned pregnant would be considered the greatest advancement in cardiac monitoring of the century, completely overshadowing his own contributions to the field. As Jonathan Reynolds unfolded the prestigious invitation to lecture at Harvard Medical School, the wheels of destiny were already turning 300 miles away in New York City. 3 years had passed since Melissa's first significant investment, and Carter Biotech was beginning to emerge from obscurity into the specialized spotlight of medical technology innovation. The morning sun filtered through the windows of their expanded laboratory space in Brooklyn's Innovation District. No longer confined to 500 square feet, Carter Biotech now occupied an entire floor, with dedicated research areas, testing facilities, and a small staff of 6 specialized engineers and researchers. Melissa adjusted her simple but professional blazer before stepping to the podium at the American Biomedical Engineering Conference. Though a minor event in the grand scheme of medical gatherings, it represented her first public presentation of Carter Biotech's cardiac monitoring technology to the broader scientific community. Deep breath, she whispered to herself, scanning the room of approximately 50 specialists. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged her notes, but her voice remained steady as she began. Conventional cardiac monitoring fails us in one critical aspect: timing. By the time traditional systems detect an anomaly, the patient is often already experiencing a cardiac event. Our technology changes that fundamental paradigm. As she proceeded through her data, showing detection windows previously thought impossible, the initial polite attention transformed into genuine engagement. Questions from veteran cardiologists and biomedical engineers became increasingly specific and technical, revealing their growing interest. In the back row, Emma and Ethan sat with Eleanor, the 10-year-olds quietly observing the professional dynamics with unusual sophistication for their age. Emma's notebook was filled with calculations, occasionally correcting the mathematical models Melissa presented on screen. "Mom's pressure compensation variable is off by 0.03, she whispered to Eleanor, who smiled knowingly. "Why don't you tell her afterward?" Eleanor suggested. "I'm sure she'd appreciate the correction." After Melissa's presentation, a distinguished cardiologist approached, his skepticism evident despite his cordial tone. "Impressive claims, Ms. Carter, though I'm curious about your background. Your bio doesn't mention a medical degree or engineering certification." "It's actually Dr. Carter," Emma interjected, stepping forward with remarkable confidence. "She has a PhD in being our mom, which required mastering biochemistry, engineering, and business simultaneously." The specialist blinked in surprise as Emma continued, pointing to his handwritten notes. "And your concern about pressure variables? You've miscalculated. The algorithm already accounts for the variance you're questioning." Melissa gently placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Emma has a gift for mathematical analysis. She's been helping refine our algorithms since she was 7. The specialist's expression shifted from skepticism to intrigued respect. "I'd like to arrange a trial at Massachusetts General, if you're open to external validation." This pattern repeated throughout the day. Initial skepticism followed by reluctant admiration as the undeniable data overcame preconceptions about the young female founder without traditional credentials. By conference end, Melissa had arranged 5 potential hospital trials and caught the attention of 2 additional investor groups. Back at their Washington Heights apartment that evening, Melissa helped the twins with their advanced placement homework while simultaneously preparing for an investor meeting the following day. "Mom, "The Goldstein Foundation called while you were reviewing contracts," Ethan said, handing her a meticulously written message in his elegant handwriting. At 10, his communication skills had developed to the point where he often drafted correspondence for Carter Biotech in multiple languages. "They want to discuss funding your pediatric adaptation," he continued, switching effortlessly to German, a language he'd been studying for a project on European medical regulations. Emma looked up from her quantum physics homework. "I've already modified the algorithm for pediatric parameters. The adjustments account for developmental variations across age groups." Melissa smiled, still amazed by their extraordinary abilities. What would Carter Biotech do without you two? The company's growth wasn't without challenges. Established medical device manufacturers began taking notice, occasionally sending representatives to observe their presentations or attempting to recruit their engineers. Patent attorneys consumed an increasing portion of their limited budget, protecting their intellectual property from potential infringement. 3 months after the conference, Melissa sat across from representatives of Meridian Ventures, a significant medical technology investment fund whose interest could transform Carter Biotech's trajectory. "Your preliminary clinical results are impressive," said Robert Chen, Meridian's principal partner, reviewing the data from their first hospital trial. 96% accuracy in predicting cardiac events 4 hours before conventional symptoms is unprecedented. His colleague, an older man with steel-gray hair, leaned forward with skepticism etched across his features. "But I'm concerned about leadership capacity. A single mother without medical credentials running a company with this much potential? It's an unusual arrangement." Melissa had encountered this sentiment frequently enough to maintain her composure. "I understand your concern, Mr. Blackwell. However, Carter Biotech's current valuation of $80 million reflects market confidence in our leadership structure. I've assembled a medical advisory board of 6 cardiologists who oversee clinical applications while maintaining direct control over our core technology development." "Still," Blackwell persisted, "this type of company traditionally requires someone with established industry connections. Someone like a man with an Ivy League medical degree?" Melissa suggested, her tone pleasant but firm. "The traditional approach to cardiac monitoring has remained essentially unchanged for 20 years precisely because of established thinking. Our advantage is bringing fresh perspective to an ossified field." Robert Chen smiled slightly, seeming to appreciate her composed pushback. "Let's cut to the chase. We're prepared to offer $3 million for 15% equity, with additional milestone-based funding available up to $12 million total. The investment would allow Carter Biotech to expand clinical trials nationally, hire specialized regulatory consultants for FDA approval, and begin developing their next-generation monitoring system." Melissa's hands trembled slightly as she signed the term sheet later that week, the magnitude of the moment not lost on her. "We've secured funding through FDA approval," she told the twins that evening, spreading celebratory pizza across their kitchen table, a rare indulgence in their health-conscious household. "Does this mean we can get better computers for the algorithm processing?" Emma asked practically, her priorities firmly established. "And maybe hire that Japanese researcher you liked?" Ethan added, referencing a brilliant biomedical engineer Melissa had met at a conference in Chicago. Melissa laughed, still amazed by their ability to focus on next steps rather than celebrating achievements. "Yes to both. And maybe we can take that weekend trip to Washington, D.C. I've been promising." As Carter Biotech expanded, Melissa sometimes caught glimpses of Jonathan's continuing career through medical journals or industry news. A profile in the New England Journal of Medicine highlighted his pioneering surgical techniques. Boston Magazine featured the Reynolds-Wellington mansion during a charity home tour, describing the power couple's exquisite taste in 19th-century antiques. These glimpses provided strange contrast to Melissa's life. Still modest despite their growing success, still focused on practical concerns rather than social appearances. Their apartment, though comfortable, remained decidedly middle class. Her wardrobe, while professional, consisted largely of carefully selected basics rather than designer labels. The twins attended an accelerated program at a public school for gifted students, where they consistently tested years beyond their grade level. While Jonathan appeared in society pages at charity galas, Melissa spent evenings helping the twins with advanced research projects or refining algorithm parameters while eating takeout at their kitchen table. The parallel lives couldn't have been more different, yet increasingly, it was Melissa's choices that were yielding greater innovation. As Carter Biotech's reputation grew in specialized circles, Melissa found herself invited to speak at more prestigious medical technology conferences. At a Cardiology Innovation Summit in Chicago, she presented their latest results to an audience that included representatives from major hospital systems and medical device manufacturers. The implications for preventative cardiology are profound, she concluded, displaying data from their expanded clinical trials. Patients previously considered low risk have been identified pre-symptomatically, allowing intervention before catastrophic events. The applause was substantial. The questions afterward thoughtful and engaged rather than skeptical. Afterward, the chief of cardiology from Cleveland Clinic approached her. "We'd like to implement a full-scale trial immediately," he said without preamble. "Your technology could transform our preventative care protocols." That evening in her hotel room, Melissa received a call from Professor Bennett, who had become an advisor to Carter Biotech's board. "The industry is taking notice," he said without preamble. Thomson Healthcare Report just published an article calling Carter Biotech the most promising cardiac monitoring breakthrough of the decade. As Carter Biotech's profile rose in medical technology circles, Jonathan's perfect life began showing stress fractures. Boston medical circles whispered about tension between the renowned surgeon and his socialite wife. His innovative surgical approach, while initially celebrated, had shown complications in several high-profile cases, leading to uncomfortable questions at medical conferences. During a benefit dinner at Massachusetts General Hospital, Jonathan found himself seated next to the hospital's research director, who mentioned the promising cardiac monitoring system being developed by a remarkable young company in New York. "Carter Biotech," the director enthused. "Their preliminary results are extraordinary, potentially reducing emergency cardiac interventions by predicting events hours before conventional symptoms appear." Jonathan nodded politely, the name not yet triggering any connection to his past. "Sounds interesting, though I'm skeptical of claims about predictive monitoring. The physiological indicators are too variable." "That's what makes their approach revolutionary," the director continued. "They've developed algorithms that adapt to individual baselines. We're implementing a trial next month." While Jonathan's professional confidence remained outwardly unshaken, behind closed doors, his marriage showed increasing strain. The mansion in Beacon Hill echoed with late-night arguments about his absences, his obsession with maintaining his medical reputation, his dismissal of Catherine's social obligations. "You missed the hospital board dinner again," Catherine accused, her voice carrying through their expensively decorated living room. "Do you realize how that reflects on me, on us?" "I was performing emergency surgery," Jonathan replied coldly. "Presumably saving a life outranks cocktails with your father's colleagues." As Jonathan's carefully constructed life showed hairline fractures, Melissa's once fragile existence had solidified into something formidable. Carter Biotech now employed 28 people, occupied expanded office space in Brooklyn's Innovation District, and had secured partnerships with 7 major hospital systems for extended clinical trials. The twins, now recognized widely as prodigies, had been featured in an educational journal article about exceptionally gifted children. Emma's mathematical abilities had earned her invitations to collaborate with university researchers, while Ethan's linguistic talents and diplomatic nature made him a natural ambassador for the company during international negotiations. In the plane returning from the conference, while the twins slept exhausted in economy seats, Melissa couldn't imagine that in just 2 years she would be flying in her own private jet to receive an innovation award that Jonathan Reynolds would watch on television, recognizing too late what he had lost. In the 2 years that followed, the medical technology landscape underwent a seismic shift that few could have predicted. Carter Biotech's monitoring device, now in its fifth-generation prototype, had demonstrated unprecedented success in extensive clinical trials across 12 major hospital systems. The FDA approval process, typically a labyrinthine journey requiring years of navigation, had been expedited after the device saved the life of a prominent senator during a beta test at Johns Hopkins. Melissa stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new office on the 23rd floor of a sleek Manhattan tower, watching the city that had once made her feel so small and insignificant now spread beneath her like a kingdom. The Carter Biotech headquarters had relocated from Brooklyn 6 months earlier, a necessary expansion as the company's valuation surpassed $500 million. "Ms. Carter?" Her assistant's voice came through the intercom. "The FDA committee is on line 1. They have their final decision." Melissa's heart raced as she picked up the phone, her knuckles white against the receiver. The twins, now 12 and attending an elite program for profoundly gifted children, watched from the sitting area of her office where they had been reviewing advanced calculus problems. "Dr. Carter," the committee chair began, "I'm pleased to inform you that your cardiac monitoring system has received full FDA approval for clinical use." The committee was particularly impressed with the 97% accuracy rate in predicting cardiac events and the minimal false positive instances in the expanded trials. When she hung up, Melissa stood motionless, momentarily overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they had accomplished. Emma broke the silence, her analytical mind already racing to next steps. "This means we can begin manufacturing at scale," she said, pulling up production projections on her tablet. "I've already calculated the optimal distribution model for the first 10,000 units. Ethan approached his mother, resting his hand on her arm with the emotional intelligence that balanced his sister's mathematical brilliance. "You did it, Mom," he said simply, in perfect Japanese, the fourth language he had mastered, in preparation for their expansion into Asian markets. Within 3 months of FDA approval, Carter Biotech secured contracts with 37 hospital systems across the country. Their device, elegantly designed and surprisingly affordable compared to competing monitoring technologies, quickly became the standard for at-risk cardiac patients. Medical journals published studies confirming its effectiveness. Cardiology departments restructured their preventative care protocols around its capabilities. The financial implications were transformative. By the twins' 12th birthday, Melissa found herself in the unimaginable position of being able to purchase a spacious 3-bedroom apartment in an elegant pre-war building overlooking Central Park. The real estate agent had initially been skeptical when she arrived at the showing in her simple business attire, without the typical entourage of assistants and advisors that usually accompanied potential buyers of $8 million properties. "Are you sure this is within your budget range, Ms. Carter?" the agent had asked delicately. Melissa had simply handed her a pre-approval letter from her bank that promptly erased any doubt. The twins' reaction to their new home was a mixture of excitement and practical assessment. Emma immediately began planning where their advanced computing equipment would be positioned, while Ethan wandered from room to room, commenting on the acoustic properties and natural light patterns in each space. "There's a separate study for each of us," he noted with approval, running his hand along built-in bookshelves that would soon house his collection of scientific journals in 7 languages. "And the building has a proper security protocol," Emma added, having already analyzed the entry system with her characteristic thoroughness. While the family settled into their new home, Carter Biotech continued its meteoric rise. Financial publications that had initially ignored the company began publishing profiles of the mysterious CEO revolutionizing cardiology. Melissa's policy of focusing on research rather than publicity had created an enigmatic corporate image that journalists found irresistible. "The cardiac queen of Manhattan remains elusive," declared the Financial Times in a feature that attempted to piece together her background from the limited information available publicly. The accompanying photograph, taken at a medical technology conference, showed Melissa in profile, her attention focused on a technical display rather than the camera, unintentionally enhancing her reputation for prioritizing innovation over recognition. As Melissa's star rose, Jonathan Reynolds encountered his first significant professional setback in Boston. His heavily promoted Reynolds procedure, a surgical technique for high-risk aortic repairs, resulted in serious complications for the 58-year-old wife of a university president. The case attracted unwanted scrutiny, with medical review boards questioning whether the innovative approach had been adequately tested before clinical implementation. Dr. Reynolds assures the board that all proper protocols were followed, his attorney stated to assembled reporters outside Massachusetts General Hospital. The patient's pre-existing conditions contributed significantly to the unfortunate outcome. Behind closed doors, however, Jonathan faced increasingly uncomfortable questions from colleagues who had once deferred to his expertise without hesitation. Hospital administrators spoke in careful, measured tones about reassessing risk profiles and conservative approaches moving forward. His home life offered no refuge from mounting pressures. Catherine had grown increasingly distant, her social calendar deliberately structured to minimize their time together. Their conversations, once filled with mutual ambition and planning, had devolved into terse exchanges about household logistics and public appearances. "The hospital charity gala is next Saturday," Catherine reminded him over breakfast in their elegant dining room, her attention focused on her tablet rather than her husband. "Try to be on time for once. The Whitmores specifically asked that we be seated at their table." "I'll have my secretary adjust my surgical schedule," Jonathan replied automatically, barely registering the conversation as he reviewed case notes for the day ahead. The contrast between their increasingly hollow marriage and the genuine partnership Melissa had built with her children couldn't have been more stark. While Jonathan and Catherine maintained perfect appearances in separate spheres, Melissa and the twins functioned as a cohesive unit, their personal and professional lives seamlessly integrated around shared goals and mutual support. "Mom, we've been invited to present at the National Mathematics Symposium," Emma announced one evening as they shared dinner at their kitchen island, a deliberately casual tradition they maintained despite their newfound wealth. "They want us to explain how we developed the predictive algorithm for the cardiac monitor," Ethan added, switching to Mandarin, his newest linguistic pursuit. Melissa looked up from reviewing manufacturing reports. "That's a tremendous honor. When is it?" "During spring break. We thought maybe we could combine it with visiting universities. MIT has that special program for mathematical prodigies that Emma's interested in." The casual way the twins referenced opportunities that most adults could only dream of accessing reflected their extraordinary development. At 12, both were already taking undergraduate courses online while maintaining their accelerated middle school curriculum. Emma's mathematical research had been cited in peer-reviewed journals, while Ethan had begun serving as a translation consultant for scientific publications requiring precise multilingual terminology. As summer approached, Melissa received an unexpected invitation to speak at a major cardiology conference in Boston, the same conference where Jonathan Reynolds was scheduled to deliver the keynote address on surgical innovations. The email from the conference organizers praised Carter Biotech's revolutionary contribution to preventative cardiology and suggested that her perspective would provide valuable contrast to the surgical approaches highlighted in Dr. Reynolds' presentation. Melissa stared at the invitation for a long moment, her finger hovering over the delete button. Boston held no fond memories. The city represented Jonathan's world, the realm where she had been deemed unworthy. Yet professional pragmatism overrode personal hesitation. The conference represented an unparalleled opportunity to introduce Carter Biotech's technology to the most influential cardiologists in the country. "I think you should accept," Eleanor advised when Melissa called to discuss the invitation. Their relationship had evolved from mentor-protégé to deep friendship, with Eleanor serving as both professional sounding board and surrogate grandmother to the twins. Perhaps it's time the medical world sees that the waitress from the Bronx has surpassed Harvard's golden boy. The twins were immediately enthusiastic about the Boston trip, unaware of its potential emotional complications for their mother. "We can visit Harvard while we're there," Ethan suggested, already researching campus tours. "Their linguistics department has that manuscript collection I've wanted to see. And MIT's biomedical engineering lab," Emma added, her mind racing with possibilities. "They're doing interesting work on nanotechnology applications that might enhance our next-generation sensors." As Melissa prepared her presentation in the weeks leading up to the conference, financial news brought an unexpected development. Carter Biotech had been approached by multiple acquisition suitors, with preliminary valuations exceeding $2 billion. The board unanimously recommended rejecting these offers in favor of pursuing an initial public offering, a move that would potentially value the company even higher while allowing Melissa to maintain control. The evening before their departure for Boston, Melissa stood at her living room window, watching the sunset paint Central Park in golden hues. 15 years had passed since she'd sat in that opulent office on Fifth Avenue, hearing Jonathan declare her unworthy of his world. Now she would return to his territory not as a supplicant, but as an equal, perhaps even as a superior in the field he had claimed as his exclusive domain. "Mom, are you okay?" Ethan asked, joining her at the window with the emotional sensitivity that made him so attuned to subtle shifts in mood. "Just thinking about how far we've come," she replied, putting her arm around his shoulders, now nearly level with her own. "Sometimes the journey seems surreal." "Emma says the probability of our specific circumstances was statistically improbable," he offered with a small smile. "But I think we beat the odds because we had you." The next morning, as they boarded the private jet chartered by the conference organizers, a courtesy extended to featured speakers, Melissa couldn't help but reflect on her first trip to Boston years ago, when she had traveled by bus to visit Jonathan at his family home, only to be introduced as a med school colleague rather than his girlfriend. As the sleek aircraft lifted off from Teterboro Airport, Melissa couldn't possibly imagine that destiny had orchestrated not just her first reunion with Jonathan after 12 years, but also the moment when he would discover that the bastards he had rejected were now the heirs to an empire that completely eclipsed his own achievements. As the sleek jet soared over the eastern seaboard, Emma and Ethan pressed their faces against the windows, marveling at the coastline below. For them, this private flight represented another exciting academic adventure. For Melissa, it symbolized a journey 15 years in the making, a return to the city where her dreams had once been callously dismissed. The Carter Biotech IPO preparation documents rested on her lap, awaiting final review. The preliminary valuation estimates had left even seasoned investment bankers speechless. $2 billion at opening, with projections reaching as high as $3 billion after the first trading day. Numbers that would have seemed hallucinatory to the pregnant waitress stumbling out of Jonathan's office 15 years ago. "Mom, look at these specifications for the Boston Scientific Cardiac Lab," Emma said, sliding her tablet across the small table that separated their leather seats. "Their imaging equipment could help us refine the microvascular detection parameters." Melissa smiled at her daughter's perpetual focus on improvement. At 14, Emma viewed the world as a collection of systems awaiting optimization. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, her intelligent eyes constantly assessing, calculating. "And Harvard's archives have those early cardiac monitoring patents I wanted to examine," Ethan added, glancing up from his linguistics textbook. Unlike his sister's laser focus, Ethan absorbed everything around him: languages, cultural nuances, the subtle emotional currents that often escaped Emma's notice. "We'll make time for both," Melissa promised, returning to the IPO documents. The numbers still seemed surreal, not just the valuation, but what it represented. Carter Biotech employed over 600 people across 7 countries. Their cardiac monitoring system had saved an estimated 12,000 lives in the past year alone. And now, Major investment banks were competing fiercely for the privilege of taking the company public. Her phone chimed with an incoming video call from Eleanor. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" Eleanor asked, her face filling the screen, concern evident in her eyes. She alone understood the emotional complexity of Melissa's return to Boston. "As ready as I'll ever be," Melissa replied, angling the phone away from the twins, who were now engaged in a spirited debate about quantum computing applications. "The presentation is solid. The clinical data speaks for itself." "I wasn't asking about the presentation," Eleanor said gently. "Jonathan will be there." Melissa's expression remained carefully neutral. "He's just another cardiologist now. Our paths were bound to cross eventually in professional settings." "Melissa," Eleanor's voice lowered, "perhaps it's time to tell the twins before they discover the truth in circumstances you can't control. Boston is his territory. People know him there." The suggestion sent a wave of anxiety through Melissa. For 14 years, she had protected the twins from the knowledge of their father's rejection. They knew only that their biological father had been unable to participate in their lives, a carefully crafted explanation that shielded them from the harsh reality. "They're not ready," Melissa whispered, glancing toward her children. "They're 14, brilliant, and increasingly curious about their origins," Eleanor countered. "You've given them everything, including strength and resilience. Trust that you've prepared them well enough to handle the truth." After ending the call, Melissa found herself lost in memories as the Massachusetts coastline came into view. She recalled her first trip to Boston, a Greyhound bus journey to surprise Jonathan during his medical school finals. He had seemed simultaneously pleased and annoyed by her arrival, introducing her to classmates as a friend from New York, rather than his girlfriend of 2 years. The pilot's announcement of their imminent landing pulled her back to the present. As the jet began its descent, Melissa squared her shoulders, mentally preparing for the coming days. The conference would be her first public appearance in Boston, her debut on what had always been Jonathan's home turf. The Four Seasons Boston welcomed them with the deferential efficiency reserved for valued guests. The presidential suite, arranged by the conference organizers, offered sweeping views of Boston Common, its 2 bedrooms and spacious living area a far cry from the cramped Bronx apartment where Melissa had once contemplated her limited options as a pregnant waitress. "This place is architecturally significant," Ethan observed, examining the suite's detailed crown molding. "It incorporates classical revival elements popular in Boston's early 20th century luxury buildings." Emma headed straight for the desk, setting up her laptop and tablet. "The Wi-Fi bandwidth is excellent. I can finish my analysis of the European clinical trial data before dinner." Watching them settle in, Melissa felt the familiar surge of pride mingled with wonder. These extraordinary young people, curious, compassionate, brilliant, had emerged from the darkest moment of her life. Every milestone, from their first words to their recent perfect SAT scores, represented a refutation of Jonathan's cruel dismissal. "I have the conference schedule," she said, pulling up the details on her phone. "My presentation is tomorrow at 10, directly following the opening keynote." "Dr. Reynolds's keynote," Emma noted, already reviewing the program. "His surgical approach to mitral valve repair has a 32% lower complication rate than traditional methods, though our monitoring system would reduce the need for such interventions by identifying issues pre-surgically." Melissa's heart skipped at the casual mention of Jonathan's name. "You've researched his work?" "Of course," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "He's considered innovative in surgical techniques, though his approach is reactive rather than preventative, completely opposite to our philosophy. His recent outcomes haven't been as impressive," Ethan added, scrolling through medical journal abstracts. 3 high-profile complications in the past year. The medical blogs suggest he's becoming defensive about criticism. The twins' clinical assessment of Jonathan's career, devoid of any personal connection, struck Melissa as both surreal and darkly appropriate. They had analyzed him as they would any other scientific figure, unaware they were evaluating their biological father. That evening, while the twins attended a special reception for young scientists participating in the conference's education program, Melissa prepared for her presentation. The suite's living room transformed into a workspace, with data charts and presentation slides spread across every surface. A notification from her tablet interrupted her concentration. Breaking news from a Boston financial blog. Boston surgical star Jonathan Reynolds faces potential lawsuit as Carter Biotech revolutionizes cardiac care. The article detailed how Jonathan's surgical approach was being rendered increasingly obsolete by preventative technologies like Carter Biotech's monitoring system. It noted the recent complications in his surgical cases and speculated about his diminishing influence in the field he once dominated. Melissa closed the article, uncomfortable with the direct comparison. Despite everything, she had never sought personal vindication against Jonathan, only the validation of her work and security for her children. Her phone chimed with a message from the conference organizer. "Dr. Carter, we've elevated your presentation to co-keynote status alongside Dr. Reynolds tomorrow. Your revolutionary approach deserves equal prominence with traditional surgical innovations. Both of you will address the full assembly at 9 a.m. The schedule change meant she would share the stage with Jonathan, their contrasting approaches to cardiac care directly juxtaposed before the entire medical community. The symmetry was almost too perfect. The man who had dismissed her as unworthy would now stand beside her as an equal, possibly even as her inferior in their shared field. That night, sleep proved elusive. Melissa stood at the suite's windows, watching Boston's lights glimmer across the common. Somewhere in this city, Jonathan was likely reviewing his own presentation, unaware that tomorrow would bring him face to face with the woman and children he had abandoned. What would he see when he looked at her? The terrified pregnant waitress was gone, replaced by a confident CEO and researcher whose work was transforming cardiac care globally. Her once shabby clothes had given way to understated designer attire. Her formerly uncertain posture now reflected 15 years of hard-won authority. And the twins, what would he see in them? His own features were unmistakably mirrored in Ethan's analytical gaze and Emma's determined profile. Would he recognize them immediately? Would he feel anything at all? Morning arrived with a flurry of preparations. Melissa selected her outfit with careful consideration. A tailored Armani suit in deep navy, elegant but not ostentatious, projecting quiet confidence rather than statement wealth. Her once wild curls were now smoothed into a sophisticated chignon, her minimal jewelry selected for quality rather than show. The twins dressed with their characteristic attention to detail, Emma in a conservative skirt suit that mimicked her mother's professional style, Ethan in a blazer and tie that reflected his more artistic sensibilities. Standing together in the suite's foyer, they presented a striking trio, intelligent, polished, and unmistakably a family unit. "Nervous?" Ethan asked perceptively, noting the slight tension in his mother's shoulders as they prepared to leave. "Just the usual pre-presentation jitters," Melissa replied, forcing a smile. Emma adjusted her tablet in her messenger bag. "Statistically speaking, you have no reason for anxiety. Our monitoring system's outcomes data is irrefutable. Dr. Reynolds' surgical approach, while technically impressive, addresses problems our technology prevents entirely." The innocence of her assessment, comparing her unknown father's work to their family's innovation without any awareness of the personal connection, nearly broke Melissa's composure. As their car approached the conference center, Melissa found herself rehearsing potential scenarios. Would Jonathan approach her? Would he pretend not to recognize her? How would she introduce the twins if confronted directly? "Remember," she told them as they exited the car, "whatever happens today, we're a team. Always have been, always will be." The twins exchanged confused glances at the unexpected sentiment, but nodded in agreement. The conference lobby bustled with medical professionals from across the globe. Heads turned as Melissa entered with the twins, whispers following in their wake. The Carter biotech revolution had transformed cardiac care so fundamentally that its founder's presence created an immediate stir. As they checked in at the registration desk, Melissa felt a prickling sensation at the back of her neck, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. Turning slightly, she caught a glimpse of a tall figure at the far end of the lobby, surrounded by colleagues but staring directly at her. Jonathan Reynolds had aged well, his dark hair now distinguished with silver at the temples, his bearing still projecting the confidence that came from a lifetime of privilege. But as their eyes met across the crowded space, Melissa saw something she had never witnessed in him before: uncertainty. In the moment their eyes locked across the crowded lobby, Melissa couldn't possibly predict that destiny had orchestrated not just her first reunion with Jonathan after 15 years, but also the moment when he would discover that the bastards he had rejected were now the heirs to an empire that completely eclipsed his own achievements. Time seemed to slow as Jonathan and Melissa locked eyes across the crowded lobby. For a moment, the bustle of the conference faded away, leaving only the electric connection between two people whose lives had diverged so dramatically 15 years ago. Jonathan's expression shifted from professional confidence to stunned recognition, his hand freezing mid-gesture as he addressed the colleagues surrounding him. Melissa felt Ethan's hand on her elbow. "Mom, is everything okay?" She pulled her gaze away from Jonathan, composing herself quickly. "Everything's fine. Let's get to the preparation room. They'll want to test my presentation slides before the keynote." As they navigated through the crowd of medical professionals, Melissa felt the weight of Jonathan's stare following them. The twins, perceptive as always, exchanged glances but remained quiet, respecting their mother's sudden tension without questioning it. The conference preparation room buzzed with technicians and speakers reviewing last-minute details. A staff member approached immediately, clipboard in hand. "Dr. Carter, we're so honored to have you. I'll need both you and Dr. Reynolds on stage in 30 minutes for sound checks and introductions." "Both of us together?" Melissa asked, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. "Yes, the program committee decided your contrasting approaches represent the perfect dichotomy in modern cardiac care. Dr. Reynolds exemplifying surgical intervention, you representing preventative monitoring, the past and future of cardiology, if you will." Emma, ever practical, immediately opened her tablet. "Mom, I should review your slides one more time. Your transition from the clinical outcomes to the cost-benefit analysis could be sharper." Across the room, Jonathan entered with his entourage of fellows and assistants. Unlike Melissa's two-person support team, her children, Jonathan surrounded himself with deferential professionals carrying his materials and anticipating his needs. His tailored suit and commanding presence still exuded the privilege that had once seemed so intimidating to a young waitress from New Jersey. Their eyes met again, and this time Jonathan's professional mask slipped completely. He stared openly at the twins, his gaze moving between them and Melissa with dawning recognition. Ethan's jawline, Emma's analytical eyes. They were unmistakable reflections of his own features, matured and refined in these extraordinary young people. "Dr. Reynolds?" his assistant prompted, concerned by his sudden distraction. Jonathan collected himself with visible effort. "I'll be right there. Give me a moment." He moved purposefully toward Melissa, his colleagues watching in confusion as he abandoned their conversation mid-sentence. "Melissa," he said quietly when he reached her, his voice a mixture of disbelief and forced cordiality. "It's been a long time." "Dr. Reynolds," she replied, her tone professionally pleasant but distant. "Yes, it has." His eyes darted to the twins who were watching the exchange with undisguised curiosity. "Are these my children, yes, Emma and Ethan Carter." She emphasized their surname slightly. "They assist with our algorithm development and clinical trial analysis." Jonathan extended his hand automatically. "Dr. Jonathan Reynolds, I'm pleased to meet you both." Emma shook his hand firmly, her analytical gaze assessing him like a particularly interesting research subject. Your work on minimally invasive mitral valve repair is statistically significant, though our monitoring system would potentially eliminate 63% of such surgical interventions through early detection. Jonathan blinked, visibly thrown by her direct assessment. You're familiar with my research? We study all major approaches to cardiac care, Ethan explained, his tone diplomatically smoothing his sister's bluntness. Your surgical innovations were groundbreaking for their time. The phrase, "for their time," hung in the air between them, a subtle but unmistakable relegation of Jonathan's work to the past tense. A conference organizer approached, saving them from further awkward exchange. "Dr. Reynolds, Dr. Carter, we're ready for you on stage for sound check." "We'll find seats in the front row," Ethan told his mother, his perceptive eyes moving between her and Jonathan with growing suspicion. As they walked toward the main auditorium, Jonathan moved closer to Melissa. "They're remarkable," he said quietly. "Yes, they are," she replied simply. "How old are they now?" 14. The mathematical implication hung between them, requiring no further elaboration. Jonathan's pace faltered slightly as the confirmation of what he already suspected sank in. "Melissa, we should talk." "We're about to present to 800 cardiologists, Dr. Reynolds. Perhaps we should focus on that first." The main auditorium was already filling with attendees, the buzz of anticipation palpable as the two keynote speakers approached the stage. The conference moderator, a distinguished cardiologist from Johns Hopkins, beamed at them both. "This is historical. Two contrasting approaches to cardiac care represented by our field's most innovative minds. Dr. Reynolds, you'll present first for 20 minutes, followed by Dr. Carter. Then we'll have a 15-minute joint Q&A. Jonathan's presentation reflected his surgical background, precise, technically impressive, but fundamentally reactive. His slides showed sophisticated surgical techniques addressing cardiac damage that had already occurred. The audience responded with respectful attention, the kind reserved for established authorities whose contributions were significant but increasingly seen as conventional wisdom. As Melissa waited in the wings, she observed Jonathan's confident delivery, the way he commanded the stage that had always been his natural habitat. Yet there was something different about him now, a slight defensive edge when describing surgical outcomes, an occasional glance toward where Emma and Ethan sat in the front row, their expressions attentive but analytical. When Jonathan concluded to polite applause, the moderator introduced Melissa with palpable enthusiasm. "And now, the approach that's being called the greatest advancement in cardiac monitoring of the century, Dr. Melissa Carter, founder and CEO of Carter Biotech." The applause that greeted Melissa as she took the stage was noticeably more energetic, the response reserved for revolutionary ideas rather than incremental improvements. She moved to the podium with a quiet confidence that needed no performative authority. "The future of cardiac care isn't about cutting better," she began, her voice clear and assured. "It's about preventing the need to cut at all." What followed was a masterclass in preventative medicine, data-driven, patient-centered, and undeniably transformative. Melissa's slides showed real-time monitoring results, predictive algorithms that identified cardiac issues hours or days before conventional symptoms, and patient outcome statistics that rendered traditional approaches increasingly obsolete. From his seat at the side of the stage, Jonathan watched with a complex mixture of emotions. The professional in him recognized the brilliance of her innovation. The man who had once dismissed her watched in stunned disbelief as the unworthy waitress commanded the complete attention of the medical elite he had spent his life trying to impress. The audience's reaction to Melissa's presentation was immediate and electric. Gasps at particularly striking data points, murmurs of appreciation for the elegant simplicity of the monitoring system's design, and finally, a standing ovation when she concluded. "The Carter Biotech monitoring system has already saved more than 12,000 lives," she finished, "not by intervening after cardiac events, but by preventing them entirely. This is the paradigm shift our patients deserve." During the joint Q&A session, The contrast between their approaches became even more pronounced. Jonathan found himself repeatedly defending reactive surgical interventions while Melissa calmly presented data supporting preventative monitoring. The audience questions increasingly focused on her technology, his contributions seeming increasingly antiquated by comparison. As the session concluded, the moderator beamed at them both. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've witnessed the present and future of cardiac care today. Please join me in thanking Dr. Reynolds and Dr. Carter." The reception area filled quickly after the keynote presentations. Melissa found herself surrounded by cardiologists eager to discuss implementation of the Carter monitoring system in their hospitals. Emma and Ethan moved through the crowd with surprising poise, answering technical questions about algorithms and data protocols with an expertise that belied their youth. From across the room, Jonathan observed this scene with growing discomfort. The twins, unmistakably his children biologically, navigated the professional environment with a confidence he had spent decades cultivating. Their intelligence was evident to everyone who spoke with them, their contributions to the revolutionary technology clearly substantial. "Dr. Reynolds?" A young cardiologist approached him hesitantly. "Your presentation was very informative, but I'm particularly interested in how your surgical approach might be modified given the early detection capabilities of the Carter system." Jonathan forced himself to focus on the question, though his eyes kept drifting to where Melissa stood with the twins, now the center of attention in a room he had always dominated. When the morning sessions concluded, Melissa guided the twins toward the exit, intending to use the lunch break to prepare for her afternoon presentation on implementation strategies. Jonathan interceded before they could leave, positioning himself directly in their path. "Melissa, Dr. Carter, could we speak privately for a moment?" Emma's eyes narrowed slightly. "Mom, why does Dr. Reynolds seem unusually interested in speaking with you? The statistical probability of such focused attention from a competitor is anomalous." Jonathan's gaze shifted to Emma, unable to hide his reaction to her analytical assessment, so similar to his own clinical thinking, yet directed at him as an object of study. "Mom?" Ethan prompted, his perceptive eyes moving between the adults, sensing undercurrents he couldn't yet identify. Melissa maintained her composure, though her hand tightened slightly on her portfolio. "Dr. Reynolds and I have crossed paths professionally before." "Professionally?" Jonathan couldn't keep the edge from his voice. "I think we need to discuss—" "Perhaps after the conference concludes," Melissa interrupted smoothly. "We have the implementation panel this afternoon." As they moved past him toward the exit, Ethan glanced back, his gaze lingering on Jonathan's face with growing suspicion. The resemblance between them, thrown into sharp relief by proximity, was impossible to miss. The same contemplative furrow between the eyebrows, the same analytical head tilt. In an empty conference room secured by his assistant, Jonathan paced anxiously, waiting for his afternoon session to begin. The morning's events had shaken him profoundly. Melissa Carter, the pregnant waitress he had dismissed with a check and cruel words, had transformed into a powerhouse of medical innovation. And the twins, the bastards he had questioned were even his, were clearly extraordinary, their intelligence and poise undeniable. His phone chimed with a message from Catherine. "Boston Magazine wants a statement about the Carter Biotech presentation overshadowing yours. How should I respond?" Jonathan stared at the message, the perfect encapsulation of how completely the power dynamic had shifted. 15 years ago, he had been the promising surgeon with everything ahead of him, Melissa the desperate waitress with nothing. Now her innovation was rendering his life's work increasingly obsolete, her company valuation dwarfing his personal wealth. Her children, his biological children, heirs to an empire he had no part in building. While the Carter family left the main hall, Melissa knew this brief encounter was merely the prelude to a storm approaching. In a few hours, during the conference gala dinner, the full truth would emerge in ways that would permanently alter 4 lives. The anticipation of the evening's gala dinner hung in the air as Emma and Ethan returned to their hotel suite. While Melissa remained at the conference center for an impromptu meeting with hospital administrators eager to implement the Carter biotech system, the twins found themselves with an unexpected window of free time. Their mother's uncharacteristic tension during the encounter with Dr. Reynolds had not gone unnoticed. "Something's off," Emma stated, setting her tablet on the suite's marble counter. Mom's cortisol levels were elevated during that interaction. Her carotid pulse was visible, and she exhibited micro-expressions consistent with concealed stress. Ethan nodded, loosening his tie as he settled into the plush sofa. "Did you notice how Dr. Reynolds kept staring at us? Not just professionally curious, but personally interested." The statistical probability of a random professional rival displaying that level of focused attention is approximately 0.03%, Emma calculated, already pulling up her laptop. "There's an undisclosed variable in this equation." Ethan watched his sister's fingers fly across the keyboard. "What are you doing?" "Research," she replied simply. "Dr. Jonathan Reynolds, Harvard Medical School, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery at Massachusetts General, married to Catherine Wellington Reynolds of the Boston Wellingtons." She scrolled through search results, methodically cataloging information. "Pioneering cardiac surgeon, though his innovation metrics have declined by 27% over the past 3 years." "Look for any connection to Mom," Ethan suggested, moving to look over her shoulder. "Maybe they competed for the same grant or—" "Wait!" Emma stopped scrolling, her finger hovering over a 15-year-old article from a Boston Medical Society newsletter. "Reynolds completes fellowship, relocates to Boston." The scanned article featured a younger Jonathan in a white coat, smiling confidently at the camera. The brief text mentioned his promising career ahead at Massachusetts General and noted that Dr. Reynolds ended personal entanglements in New York to focus exclusively on his surgical future. Emma's eyes narrowed. "The timing aligns with Mom's move from New Jersey to New York, approximately 9 months before our birth." Ethan's breath caught. "Search for more from that time period." A few more keystrokes brought up another article, this one from a society page. "Wellington Medical Dynasty welcomes rising star." The piece detailed Jonathan's engagement to Catherine Wellington, with a quote from Jonathan himself. "I've always been focused on building the right future, professionally and personally. Catherine represents the perfect partnership for a surgeon with my ambitions." The twins exchanged looks, the implications settling between them like a physical weight. "He fits the profile," Emma whispered, her typical analytical detachment faltering. Chronologically and geographically, he was in New York during the right time frame. And biologically, she touched her own face unconsciously. The phenotypical similarities are statistically significant. Ethan swallowed hard. Mom never said he rejected us. She just said he wasn't able to participate in our lives. "A technically accurate but incomplete data set," Emma noted, her voice uncharacteristically emotional. "Classic Mom, protecting us with careful wording." Their research deepened as the afternoon progressed, pieces falling into place with each new discovery. They found mentions of Jonathan's residency at the same hospital where their mother had once worked as a waitress at a nearby diner. Society photos showed his rapid ascension into Boston's elite medical circles, precisely when Melissa was struggling to survive as a single mother in the Bronx. By the time Melissa returned to the suite, the twins had assembled a comprehensive timeline that left little doubt about their parentage. "How was your meeting?" Ethan asked casually as she entered, hiding the browser tabs they'd been exploring. "Productive. 5 more hospital systems want to implement our monitoring system immediately." Melissa set down her portfolio, studying their faces with maternal intuition. "You two are unusually quiet. Everything okay?" Emma, never one for emotional subterfuge, spoke directly. "We've been researching Dr. Reynolds. Based on timeline analysis and geographical correlation, we've reached a statistically significant conclusion regarding his connection to our family unit." Melissa froze, her hand still on her portfolio. "What are you talking about?" "He's our biological father, isn't he?" Ethan asked quietly. "The one who wasn't able to participate in our lives." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Melissa slowly sank onto the sofa, her professional composure cracking to reveal the weight of 15 years of carefully maintained secrets. "How did you figure it out?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Pattern recognition," Emma replied. "Plus, I have his exact jawline, and Ethan has his analytical head tilt." Despite the gravity of the moment, Melissa couldn't suppress a small smile at her daughter's matter-of-fact assessment. "I always planned to tell you when you were older. I never wanted you to feel rejected." "What actually happened?" Ethan asked, sitting beside her and taking her hand. The emotionally intuitive one, always sensing when support was needed. Melissa took a deep breath and finally shared the complete story. The 3-year relationship conducted largely in shadows, the pregnancy announcement, the cruel dismissal, the check that was supposed to solve the problem, and the words that had fueled her determination for 15 years. "You would never be worthy of the circles I move in." As she spoke, Emma paced the suite with increasing agitation, while Ethan remained still, absorbing every word with the deep emotional intelligence that balanced his sister's analytical brilliance. "He called us bastards?" Emma finally exploded, her scientific detachment evaporating completely. "He questioned paternity, with a zero statistical basis for doubt, and suggested termination?" "It was a different time in my life, in his life," Melissa said, though her tone lacked conviction. "Different circumstances don't justify cruelty," Ethan observed quietly. "And now he's seen us, seen what you've built without him, and suddenly he's interested?" The hotel phone rang, interrupting their conversation. Melissa answered, her expression shifting to surprise as she listened. "That was the front desk. Dr. Reynolds is in the lobby asking to speak with me." She hung up slowly. "With us?" Emma's posture stiffened. "Probability suggests he's recognized the biological connection and wishes to establish contact now that we represent social and intellectual assets rather than liabilities." "That's remarkably cynical even for you," Melissa noted, though she couldn't entirely disagree with her daughter's assessment. "It's merely pattern recognition based on his previous behavior," Emma countered. "People rarely change core values. They simply adapt expressions of those values to new circumstances." The gala dinner was scheduled to begin in 2 hours, leaving them little time to decide how to handle this unexpected development. After a brief family discussion, they agreed to meet Jonathan briefly in the hotel's private conference room. He was waiting when they arrived, having exchanged his professional attire for an even more formal dinner suit. The signs of agitation were evident in his slightly loosened tie and the tumbler of amber liquid on the table before him. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," he began, standing as they entered. His eyes moved hungrily over the twins' faces, now clearly seeing his own features reflected back at him. "I think we have matters to discuss that couldn't wait until after the conference." "Actually, I'm not sure what there is to discuss, Dr. Reynolds," Melissa replied, her tone professionally distant. "Our presentations are complete, and the clinical data speaks for itself." "You know that's not what I mean." Jonathan's composure slipped slightly. "These are my children." The twins, who had remained silent until this point, exchanged looks. "Biologically speaking, your assessment is accurate," Emma stated coldly. "However, biology represents only a fractional component of parental qualification." Jonathan's focus shifted to her, momentarily taken aback by her clinical tone. "I understand you must have questions." "Not really," Ethan interrupted with surprising firmness. "Mom has been remarkably transparent about the circumstances. You determined we weren't worth the potential impact on your career trajectory and made that explicitly clear before our birth." Jonathan blanched, hearing the echo of his own cruel words now processed through the brilliant mind of the son he'd never known. "I was young, ambitious, scared. Mom was young, pregnant, and abandoned. Emma countered immediately. Fascinating how divergent paths emerge from similar chronological starting points, dependent entirely on character variables. Melissa observed the exchange with a complex mixture of emotions. She had spent years imagining this confrontation, yet the reality unfolding before her was unexpected. Rather than needing her protection, the twins were demonstrating just how thoroughly she had prepared them for this moment through 15 years of unconditional love and unwavering support. "I have rights," Jonathan said, his voice lowering as he addressed Melissa directly. "Legal rights." "Rights?" Emma echoed incredulously before Melissa could respond. "Your rights were contingent on responsibilities, which you explicitly rejected 15 years and 3 months ago. The statute of limitations on claiming paternal rights after voluntary abandonment is significantly shorter than that time frame." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "I see you've inherited my analytical thinking." "Correlation does not imply causation," Emma shot back. "My analytical capabilities emerged from a nurturing environment that valued intellectual curiosity, not from genetic lottery." The tension in the room was interrupted by a hotel staff member informing them that cars were waiting to transport conference speakers to the gala venue. Jonathan made one last attempt as they prepared to leave. "We should continue this conversation after the gala. There's so much I want to know about you both. Your achievements, your interests." His tone softened, almost pleading. "You're extraordinary young people." "Extraordinary bastards," Ethan corrected quietly, the uncharacteristic edge in his voice cutting through the room. "That was your term, wasn't it?" Jonathan flinched visibly, his own words returning to haunt him with devastating precision. The Copley Plaza ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and medical royalty when they arrived. Melissa, radiant in a burgundy evening gown that contrasted sharply with the memory of her waitress uniform, entered with the twins flanking her like protective sentinels. The room's reaction was immediate. Conversations paused, heads turned, recognition and respect evident in the expressions of the medical elite who had gathered to honor innovation. When Jonathan entered shortly after, the contrast in reception was palpable. Where once he would have been the center of attention, now he received merely polite acknowledgments, overshadowed by the woman he had once dismissed as unworthy. Midway through dinner, the conference chairman approached the podium for announcements. "Tonight we honor medical pioneers who transform patient care through innovation. But first, some exciting breaking news. Carter Biotech has just announced their initial public offering, with an unprecedented valuation of $2.7 billion, the largest in medical technology history." Applause erupted around the room as Melissa nodded gracious acknowledgement. From his table across the ballroom, Jonathan watched with a sickening realization of just how completely the power dynamic had shifted. The chairman continued, "We're also pleased to announce that Carter Biotech has acquired Northeastern Medical Systems, including the Reynolds Clinic for Cardiac Care, in a strategic expansion of their preventative cardiology program." A collective gasp rippled through the room as attendees processed the implication. Jonathan sat frozen, his wineglass suspended halfway to his lips, as he realized that the woman he had once paid to disappear from his life had just become, effectively, his employer. While the gala erupted in excited conversation, Jonathan remained paralyzed in his seat, observing the family he had rejected now standing triumphantly at the center of his professional world. The scandal spread rapidly among the elite medical professionals present, destroying what remained of his reputation, as Ethan and Emma's public rejection echoed the same cold dismissal he had shown Melissa 15 years before. The announcement hung in the air like a suspended cord as the attendees of the gala processed its implications. Jonathan Reynolds, once the unquestioned star of Boston's medical firmament, sat rigidly at his table, the color draining from his face as he realized that the woman he had once dismissed with a check had just acquired his clinic. The ultimate reversal of fortune had occurred in the most public way possible. Morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Carter family's hotel suite. Melissa stood by the window watching Boston awaken beneath her, the city that had once symbolized everything she could never have now spread before her like a conquered territory. Her phone had been buzzing continuously since dawn with notifications from financial news outlets reporting on Carter Biotech's historic IPO opening. "The market opened 30 minutes ago," Emma announced, not looking up from her laptop where she monitored the stock's performance. "We're already up 16% from the initial offering price. Current valuation stands at $2.9 billion and climbing." Ethan emerged from his room, tying his tie with precise movements. "The Bloomberg reporter is waiting in the lobby for your statement, Mom, and 3 hospital boards have requested emergency meetings to discuss accelerated implementation." Melissa turned from the window, taking in her extraordinary children, so composed, so brilliant, so completely unaware of how their very existence defied the cruel predictions made before their birth. "Let them wait a few more minutes. I want to talk about last night." The twins exchanged glances, their private communication system as effective as always. "We're fine, Mom," Ethan assured her, his emotional intelligence as sharp as ever. Learning the complete truth about Dr. Reynolds was clarifying, not damaging. "Precisely," Emma agreed, closing her laptop. "Your statistical probability of success as a single mother with no resources was approximately 0.03%. Yet you achieved outcomes that outperformed established success metrics by several standard deviations. That's the relevant data point here, not his rejection." Melissa felt her throat tighten with emotion. These children, these remarkable, compassionate, brilliant human beings, had somehow emerged from the darkest moment of her life with their spirits intact, their hearts open, their minds extraordinary. "I just want you to know," she said carefully, "that whatever happens next, whatever Jonathan tries to do, we're a complete family exactly as we are. We always have been." The suite's phone rang, interrupting their moment. The front desk announced that Dr. Jonathan Reynolds was in the lobby, insisting on speaking with them before they departed for the day's conference sessions. Emma's expression hardened. Predictable. His social standing has been compromised, and he's attempting damage control. "Should I tell them to send him away?" Melissa asked, surprising herself by genuinely seeking her children's input on this crucial decision. Ethan considered for a moment. "I think we should see him. Not for his benefit, but for closure. On our terms." 20 minutes later, Jonathan sat across from them in the suite's elegant living room, looking noticeably disheveled despite his expensive suit. The crisp confidence that had once defined him had crumbled, replaced by an agitated desperation that seemed foreign on his aristocratic features. "The acquisition of my clinic," he began without preamble. "Was that meant as some sort of revenge?" Melissa raised an eyebrow. "Contrary to what you might believe, Jonathan, my business decisions aren't based on personal vendettas. The Reynolds Clinic has excellent infrastructure and strategic market positioning for our preventative cardiology expansion. That's all. You expect me to believe this is just business?" His voice rose slightly. "After what happened between us." "What happened between us was 15 years ago," Melissa replied evenly. "Carter Biotech's acquisition strategy was developed by our board last year, based entirely on market analysis and growth projections." Emma, who had been observing the exchange with scientific detachment, interjected. "Your clinic has been operating at 27% below optimal efficiency for the past 3 fiscal quarters. The acquisition price was actually 17% above market value, suggesting Mom's team was being generous rather than vindictive." Jonathan stared at his daughter, this stranger with his analytical mind and none of his moral compromises, with a mixture of awe and discomfort. "They are my children," he said suddenly, turning back to Melissa. "Biologically, legally..." "Legally, you have no standing whatsoever," Melissa interrupted, her tone hardening. "You provided no support, signed no birth certificates, made no attempt at contact for 15 years, Any family court would dismiss your claim in minutes. I have resources, connections. So do we, Ethan said quietly, the unexpected steel in his voice silencing the room. But more importantly, we have the truth. Are you prepared for that truth to become public? For everyone to know you rejected your own children and called them bastards before they were even born? Jonathan's face paled. The twins watched him with identical expressions of calm assessment. A genetic echo of his own clinical gaze now turned back upon him with devastating effect. "What do you want?" he finally asked, deflated. "Want?" Melissa echoed. "We don't want anything from you, Jonathan. That's what you fail to understand. We built something complete and beautiful without you. Your presence or absence in our lives is irrelevant now." The words hung in the air between them, the ultimate reversal of the power dynamic established 15 years ago in that Manhattan office. A soft knock at the door announced the arrival of Melissa's executive team, ready to accompany her to the closing day of the conference. Jonathan stood, recognizing his dismissal. "This isn't over," he said, though the words lacked conviction. "Actually, it is," Melissa replied, gathering her portfolio. "The Reynolds Clinic will continue operating under new management. You're welcome to maintain your surgical privileges there. Your technical skills are still valuable to patients, but administrative control transfers to Carter Biotech effective next month." As Jonathan moved toward the door, Emma called after him. "Dr. Reynolds, one more thing." He turned, hope flickering briefly across his features. "The statistical analysis of your recent surgical outcomes shows a 17% higher complication rate than the national average. You might want to reconsider your approach to the mitral valve repair sequence. Your current technique is outdated." She delivered this assessment with the same clinical detachment he had once used to dismiss her mother. When the door closed behind him, Ethan turned to Melissa. "Are you really keeping him on as a surgeon?" "Of course," she replied. "Despite everything, he's still skilled, and this was never about revenge. It's about building something meaningful." Later that morning, as Melissa delivered the conference's closing address on the future of preventative cardiology, Jonathan sat in the back row, a solitary figure watching the woman he had once deemed unworthy command the complete attention of the medical elite he had spent his life trying to impress. 2 weeks later, the Carter family's private jet touched down at Teterboro Airport outside Manhattan. The twins had spent the remainder of their time in Boston touring prestigious universities, both already being aggressively recruited by MIT, Harvard, and other elite institutions despite being only 14. The Japanese expansion contracts were finalized this morning, Melissa told them as their car navigated the evening Manhattan traffic toward their Central Park apartment. "And the new research facility breaks ground next month." "Will we need to restructure the Reynolds Clinic completely?" Ethan asked, his mind already working on the integration challenges. "Not completely," Melissa replied. "Jonathan has agreed to our terms. 30% of the clinic's profits will fund the Mothers of Tomorrow Foundation." The foundation had been Melissa's brainchild, a non-profit dedicated to supporting single mothers with professional ambitions, providing childcare, educational grants, and mentorship. The irony of funding it through the profits of Jonathan's clinic was not lost on any of them. As their car pulled up to their building, Emma glanced at the evening edition of the Wall Street Journal on her tablet. Carter Biotech closed at 137 today. We've officially surpassed the $3 billion valuation threshold. In their penthouse apartment, floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Manhattan skyline, the same city that had once seemed so hostile to a pregnant waitress, now glittering with possibility. Melissa kicked off her heels and moved to the kitchen, maintaining their tradition of casual family dinners despite their newfound wealth. "I've been thinking," she said as they unpacked takeout containers at the kitchen island, "about what happens next." The twins looked up expectantly. "The company is established, the technology is changing lives, the foundation is launching, but I've realized that success isn't just about proving Jonathan wrong, it's about defining what matters on our own terms." "And what matters?" Ethan asked softly. Melissa looked at her children, these extraordinary human beings who had emerged from her darkest moment and felt a completeness that transcended any corporate valuation or professional triumph. "This," she said simply, "us, the family we built, the lives we'll continue to save with our work, the mothers who will benefit from the foundation." Emma, typically analytical, showed a rare moment of emotional insight. The optimal revenge wasn't financial success or professional recognition. It was building a life so complete that his absence became irrelevant. "Exactly," Melissa smiled. "Though I wouldn't call it revenge. I'd call it justice, for ourselves and for every other person told they weren't enough." As night fell over Manhattan, the Carter family continued their dinner conversation, discussing algorithm improvements and university options with the same easy camaraderie they'd maintained through years of struggle and triumph. In a city of millions, they had created their own complete universe, one built on determination, brilliance, and the unshakable bond forged in the crucible of adversity. While the jet took off toward Manhattan, Melissa looked at her extraordinary children and the empire she had built from the ashes of abandonment, understanding finally that Jonathan's rejection hadn't been her greatest tragedy, but the catalyst for her greatest triumph, a life so complete and meaningful that he could never have imagined for the unworthy waitress from the Bronx. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.